Good afternoon and welcome to Candid Conversations with the One America Movement. My name is Chandra Wetstein and I will be your host today. And our conversation this afternoon is going to be about domestic violence and homelessness in the time of COVID-19. We're very lucky today to have two expert guests with us, Tasho, Wesley, and Gillian Gansler from Rebecca's Tent, the Spiegel Women's Shelter at Shereth, Israel. Rebecca's Tent has been located in the lower level of Congregation Shereth, Israel in Atlanta for 37 years. And it originally started as an emergency winter night shelter. But today, Rebecca's Tent provides emergency housing and meals to 13 women each evening from November through April, and year-round job coaching, as well as transportation assistance and empowerment sessions as women transition to stable housing. Tasho Wesley is the executive director of Rebecca's Tent and has years of experience working on domestic violence, both in the nonprofit sector and also with state governments. And Gillian Gansler is the board chair at Rebecca's Tent and has been volunteering with the shelter for almost 20 years. So thank you, ladies, for joining us this morning. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you,
Andra.
So Rebecca's Tent provides support for over 1,200 homeless women in Atlanta. Can you tell us a little bit about the services that you all provide?
So I'm going to take that first one. So we have been in business, and thank you for Chanda for inviting us to be here today. Our shelter began in 1983 after a particularly harsh winter. And we initially started as just a night shelter. We were open initially from just November to March, just in the evenings, to give homeless women in Atlanta a bed and a meal. And today we are providing a whole lot of services. And it really has been just in addition to meals, we provide job coaching and support in empowerment sessions. We give the ladies MARTA cards and support them in interviewing with dressing and other interviewing skills. And Tasho last month actually started a day program, and I want her to talk a little bit about that.
So our day program, in partnership with Zabin Parody's Couple Shelter, we provide services to women who are not in shelter. So these are women who are living in abandoned homes, who are living out on the street, and so they can come and receive meals, they can do their laundry, they can take showers, and they can get connected to services and supports in the community.
Wow, you all do a lot of good work.
And that program began just last month, but now our sheltering season is still mostly in the winter. We did extend it this year for a few weeks. Every year we add a few more days. We are trying to cover as many evenings as we can, but it is a struggle always to have the space and to provide the services. And we want to remain true to our mission. And our mission really is to support women who are homeless in getting back on their feet. And so we do a lot of engaging them and supporting them as they go into more permanent and more stable housing. And that's going to vary depending on which woman. Stable housing for some women means returning to their families. For some women, it doesn't mean returning to their families. And now we're going to talk a little bit about that. For some women, it means getting an apartment with someone else. For some women, it might mean they need more time in a shelter. So it really depends on, and Tasho and our staff provide a lot of support to those women and a lot of case management because it is an individual situation.
And I might add, even after they transition from shelter, we still provide wraparound services for them. And it's through our follow-up case management program. So let's say someone goes to another shelter, they can still come back and receive supportive services from us weekly. And we'll provide them with MARTA transportation If they are working, we can assist them with referrals to some of our partner agencies for clothing. We provide food assistance. So we're still providing those wraparound services to them.
Wow. We know throughout the pandemic, there's really been a lot of discussion about the support that people might need to maintain their housing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that lead to homelessness and how that's specifically prevalent in this time of COVID-19?
So one of the number one reason that people, and women in particular, become homeless, the number one reason is really poverty. Their wages do not keep up with the cost of housing. And our shelter is in Atlanta, and housing prices have gone way, way up, in not just during the pandemic, obviously, but in the last 20 years, as Atlanta has become a more popular destination, the housing prices have clearly gone up. So the number one reason is a gap between what people earn and what housing costs. Last year, I believe it was 90% of our women, our residents, our overnight residents, had jobs. They had full-time jobs, many of them. They just were working in low-wage, minimum wage jobs, and they couldn't support the gap between housing and their wages. And one of the things that we are anticipating, and we've had a lot of conversations about, what's going to happen in the coming months as the economy continues in the recession. In particular, bringing up what's going to happen even next week when the jobless benefits may end. So are we going to be seeing this huge flood of homeless people? I think we are. I think there's a statistic out there that a large percentage of just regular folks, not women experiencing homelessness, could not pay their rent in June. So how many more people are going to be homeless? How many more women are we going to see? The other reason is that the second most reason that women become homeless is domestic violence. And I know Tasho's got more experience with that, so I'm going to have her.
So a lot of the times when women are fleeing domestic violence, like right now, we are receiving so many calls from domestic violence victims who are trying to flee violence in their homes. I would say on an average, we receive about 50 calls daily from people looking for shelter. And out of those 50 calls, about 57% are from DV victims. And so right now it's just a really hard time because a lot of people are staying at home. They're working from home. And so there's not a place to escape. And so what we're doing right now is, because we're in our off season, we are advocating for victims at other DV shelters across the state of Georgia.
And what happens when those women call and there are also children involved? Are there ways to get those children into shelters too, or are there other programs that happen for them?
So yes, most of the domestic violence shelters across the state of Georgia, and they not only provide services to adults, but they provide services to children. So when we're advocating for bed space for a victim, we're not only advocating for that adult, but we're advocating for those children.
So how have you seen that the pandemic has changed your program? How have you had to shift things because of the pandemic?
Well, we're located in the lower level of the synagogue, and so right now our shelter is one of the smaller shelters in the Atlanta metro, and so we're following CDC guidelines in regards to wearing masks and washing our hands and using hand sanitizer, but we're also only allowing one person to come into the space at a time, and that gives us an opportunity to, one, provide services to that individual, but also after that individual leaves, we're able to disinfect and clean that area before another person comes in. And so that limits the amount of individuals that we can serve on a daily basis, but it's best for the health and safety of not only our staff, but the individuals that we serve.
Shonda, we could do a whole separate series of shows about this, because really it has been a huge struggle. The pandemic, as Tasho was saying, women who are in difficult home situations are trapped in their home. Women who don't have a home, who are living on the streets, are in greater danger of developing COVID. And families, it's the same thing. As you know, you were saying, we had a woman that was in our shelter last season. Previous to coming to us, she was living in her car in a Walmart parking lot. So how safe is that woman in women like that? And she is not an isolated case. I'm just bringing her up because everybody can identify with living in your car in a Walmart parking lot. How is a woman like that going to protect themselves during the pandemic? It's a huge problem. We had a challenge at our shelter season, as I said, is normally November to March. Last year it was November to April. In March was when Atlanta went into shutdown, when the pandemic we thought had hit its height, and clearly it hadn't because we're now having another height. But we were in the middle of shelter season, and we made the very difficult, in terms of costly and logistically, decision that we had to get the women out of our space. Because as Tasho said, we are in the basement of a synagogue. We have 13 beds. That particular day that we made the decision, we had 8 women there, but we couldn't keep them safe. We couldn't keep them 6 feet apart. We were petrified what would happen if one of those 6 tested positive. Because as I said, most of these women are going out during the day. So they're going to their jobs. And many of those, actually most of them, were working in jobs that were considered essential. They were baggers at grocery stores or in childcare, serving first responders. So they were considered essential. They were going out during the day. When they come back at night, we couldn't protect them from each other. And we were petrified what was going to happen if one of them tested positive. And where were we going to put that person? Because it's a small space. We don't have the space. So it has caused huge challenge for a shelter like ours, but also Tasho was involved in a lot of committees of other homeless shelters. It's caused a huge challenge. And you know, when the governor or the president or whoever says shelter in place, what if you don't have a place to shelter? What if your shelter, your home, is under a bridge or in your car? How do you protect yourself and your family?
Thank you. That's really sobering to hear and to think about. I know we all have our own challenges and issues going on and trying to deal with kids and families and all of that. But I think it's definitely, time for us to also be thinking about others. So thank you for bringing that issue up. I know that Rebecca's tent, as you mentioned, is in the basement of the synagogue, but you're open to hosting folks of all races and faiths and backgrounds. So how did the shelter come to serve members of the community, and how do you make sure that all different kinds of people feel welcome, given that you're working across these divides?
We are in the basement of a synagogue, and the shelter was started in 1983, as I said, by the rabbi and a small group of volunteers from the synagogue. The 2 of whom in our shelter is Rebecca's tent, Spiegel Family Shelter, the Spiegel Shelter, and the Spiegel family, Frank and Helen Spiegel, were Holocaust survivors, and he turned to them to help start the shelter because they understood what it was like to be displaced. They had been in Europe and then they were here. So he turned to them, and Helen, if you ever met her, this tiny little woman, powerhouse. She could talk anybody into anything. And she went around to members of our synagogue, members of other synagogues, members of local churches in the area, and got people involved. And really, that was really the impetus for the shelter. And then, of course, because she talked Frank into it also. So Frank and Helen really spearheaded it, but immediately what they did was they got local churches and anybody else in our area involved. And that has continued for over 30 years. We have people on our board from local churches. We have lots and lots of volunteers from the community. So we were started by the synagogue in 2009, 2010. We became our own 501c3 also. So we are technically a separate organization. The synagogue, we are blessed with their support. They allow us to stay there, and they are really financially and everything supportive of our mission. But we are a separate organization, and Tasho and the staff work really hard to make folks from the community feel welcome. And I want to let her talk about the volunteers.
I'm sorry, Gillian, I didn't hear the last part.
Oh, I just said I was going to have you talk about the volunteers and the meals and how we involve the larger community.
So I look at it as a community effort. We have volunteers from different churches, different sorority and fraternity groups, and just different community groups across the Atlanta metro. I think we do a really good job at making the ladies feel welcome and feel it's their home, and they feel at home there. Oftentimes that I hear is that we are one of the nicest shelters in the Atlanta metro. And given the fact that we are located in the lower level of the synagogue, I think we just do a really good job. And that's a credit to not only the staff, but the volunteers at making the ladies just feel welcome there, regardless of their race, their background. We just make them feel welcome.
And are there things that right now, people watching at home maybe are listening to and they want to help, they want to give something, maybe they're there in Atlanta. What is it that we could do to support you all?
So all of our services are funded through the kindness of people. We have several fundraisers a year. We just had one and it didn't do as well as we had hoped because of the economy. But we rely on the kindness of strangers. And prior to a few years ago, all of our services were provided by volunteers, but we still, for instance, during the shelter season, all of our meals are made by volunteers. So we have a committee of folks that go out and recruit people that will make meals. And that's really where a lot of the synagogues and churches and other organizations and the Boy Scouts and everyone and fraternities have been involved, that, they will take a night and they will bring in a meal for 16 people. Dinner and the breakfast is what we typically serve. So we always need financial donations. We always need food donations in the shelter season. Tasho and her team do a great job collecting other donations. The things nobody thinks about when you're homeless. Where do you get your shampoo and your soap and those kinds of things? So she collects those, and we have airlines and hotels and others that give us those. We do rely on the kindness of strangers, though. Our volunteers are our heartbeat. We couldn't make it without them, without people coming in and serving meals. And we also do, like, for instance, on holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, we try and stay open all day, and we staff it with volunteers coming in to just be with the women, to maybe watch a movie, play a board game, just talk, or just let them read a book, whatever the situation demands. So, and Tasho also does a great job getting grants. We rely on foundations, we rely on government support, which we know is in jeopardy right now.
Tasho, do you have anything to add?
So I would say, in addition to the financial support this shelter season, because we don't know how it's going to look, we're going to need those in-kind donations, cleaning products, gloves, masks, those things, as well as there's probably going to be a need for transportation assistance. So we provide transportation assistance to the ladies. And so that includes MARTA cards as well as gift cards to gas stations so that the ladies can get to and from work. So those items, as well as food gift cards.
So we know there are a lot of really unfortunate misconceptions about homelessness. And we know that our circumstances don't define who we are as human beings, but sometimes these misconceptions can make it seem like it does. So what are some things that you two wish that people knew about the women that you serve? And how do you think we can change those misconceptions so people are more empathetic and willing to serve?
So I would say that every individual experiencing homelessness has their own story. They're not the same. Generalizing statements such as, being homeless is a decision, disregards the magnitude of reasons and circumstances around each individual and family situation. That includes the working woman living in her car with 2 children, the veteran with PTSD, or the victim fleeing domestic violence. So we should just be thoughtful in the labels that we place on individuals, and not make generalizing statements. And I think that we should continue to have these conversations, and educate individuals and just different groups on homelessness in America.
I think that one of the things that I learned when I first got involved in the shelter, I would always hear these statements such as, as Tasho was saying, it's a choice. These women have left and they're on the street by their own choice. They're not. No one wants to live on the street. I also would hear a lot of things. They're lazy. As I said before, 90% of our women are working full time. They are anything but lazy. They are maybe troubled in some cases. Some of them, as Tasho said, some might be experiencing PTSD, or some of them might have made bad decisions along the way, in terms of finances or who they partnered with. But it's no one's fault. They are regular people. They are people like you and me who have just fallen on hard times. And that's one of the things that we see at our shelter. They are really people that have fallen on hard times. We had a woman in our shelter last season. She was a business owner. She had owned a business. And in the recession 2008, she lost that business. So she got 2 jobs. She was working night and day, but then she lost those jobs and she's burning through her savings. I mean, those are regular people. Those are people that are working really, really hard. They are not somebody who is choosing a life of just depending on others. And so that's one of the things that was really eye-opening to me. And actually, when my son was little, I took him to the shelter because I wanted him to meet the women that were there. He came to help me volunteer to serve a meal. I wanted him to meet the women and just to see they were just regular people like you and me. And they are not lazy and just making bad decisions. They're just regular people who have fallen on hard times and just need somebody to give them a helping hand. And that's really the philosophy of Rebecca's Tent, is we are there to give them a helping hand and to help them get their lives back together. We're not going to give them the answers. We want them to help get their lives back together, and we will give them whatever we can to support them in those decisions and that path and that journey. But we're really there to give them a helping hand and to give them hope.
Amen. And thank you both for all that you're doing and the amount of time and effort that you all have dedicated in your lives to this issue is really incredible. So thank you very much for that. It's about time for us to wrap up this episode of Candid Conversations. Thank you again to Tasho, Wesley, and Gillian Gansler from Rebecca's Tent. I'd like to invite you now to share your social media handles so that folks can continue to follow along and support you in your journey.
Sure, it's Rebecca's Tent, ATL.
Excellent, thank you. And you can follow One America at oneamericamovement.org and find us again next Friday for our next special episode of Candid Conversations, where we will be talking with all of the One America staff about their experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.